She was serving coffee yesterday. Today she's inheriting $2.8 billion. But when 12 angry relatives learn that everything goes to the girl they've never met, the real battle begins. This is the story of Maya Chen, the heir no one expected. And what happens next will change everything you think you know about family, wealth, and what we truly inherit from those who came before us. The rain drummed against the tall windows of Blackwood Manor like impatient fingers. Inside the mahogany-paneled study, 12 people sat in leather chairs arranged in a perfect circle, their faces masks of barely contained greed disguised as grief. The air was thick with expensive perfume, aftershave, and something else. Anticipation. But when Theodore Blackwood's lawyer cleared his throat and spoke the words that would change everything, every head in that room turned to stare at the girl standing by the door. She was young, maybe 19, wearing a simple black dress that had clearly seen better days. Her shoes were scuffed, her purse was worn, and she clutched a crumpled piece of paper in her trembling hands. "Everything goes to her," the lawyer had just announced. The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the explosion of voices, the angry protests, the disbelief. But there was no mistake. And as the girl took a hesitant step forward, her green eyes reflecting both fear and determination, nobody in that room could have imagined the truth that was about to unfold. A truth that would expose decades of lies, reveal the depth of one man's regret, and prove that sometimes the most powerful inheritance isn't money at all. This is the story of Maya Chen, the heir no one expected, and the fortune that came with a price nobody saw coming. 3 days earlier, Theodore Blackwood had been buried in the family plot behind the manor. He was 92 years old, one of the wealthiest men in the state, and by all accounts, a man who had lived his life exactly as he pleased. The funeral had been a spectacle worthy of a king, with politicians, business moguls, and society elite paying their respects to a legend. But Maya Chen hadn't been at the funeral. She'd been working a double shift at the diner on 5th Street, trying to scrape together enough money for next month's rent. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, where the walls were thin and the heating barely worked. Every morning she walked 40 minutes to the community college where she studied business administration on a partial scholarship, and every evening she worked until her feet ached and her eyes burned from exhaustion. Maya had never heard of Theodore Blackwood. She had no idea that for the past 2 years, an old man had been watching her from afar, following her daily routine with the dedication of a guardian angel. She didn't know that he had anonymously paid for her textbooks, that he had quietly arranged for her scholarship to be renewed each semester, or that he had sat in his car outside the diner on countless evenings, just watching her serve customers with a smile that never wavered despite her obvious exhaustion. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier in an expensive suit who looked completely out of place in Maya's rundown neighborhood. The envelope was thick, cream-colored paper with an embossed letterhead that read, "Whitmore and Associates, Estate Attorneys." Maya's hands had shaken as she opened it. Inside was a formal invitation to the reading of Theodore Blackwood's will, scheduled for Friday afternoon at Blackwood Manor. At the bottom, in elegant script, was a handwritten note. "Your presence is required. Everything will be explained." She had stared at the letter for hours, reading it over and over again. It had to be a mistake. She'd never heard of Theodore Blackwood, had never set foot in the wealthy part of town where people like him lived. But something about the letter felt legitimate, important, and Maya had learned long ago to trust her instincts. That Friday afternoon, she had borrowed a black dress from her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, and taken 2 buses to reach the address on the letter. Blackwood Manor sat on a hill overlooking the city, its Gothic towers and manicured gardens speaking of wealth that had been accumulated over generations. As Maya walked up the long driveway, she felt like an impostor in a world where she clearly didn't belong. Inside the Manor's grand foyer, Maya's breath caught in her throat. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across marble floors, and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors gazed down from gilded frames. She had never seen anything so beautiful, so intimidating, so completely removed from her own reality. The other mourners were gathered in clusters, their voices low and urgent. Maya recognized the look in their eyes immediately. It was the same look she'd seen in her own mirror every month when the bills came due. They were calculating, measuring, hoping. These people might be wearing designer suits and carrying expensive handbags, but they were just as desperate as she was. They just hid it better. There was Richard Blackwood, Theodore's nephew, a man in his 50s whose gambling debts were the worst-kept secret in the city. His wife, Patricia, stood beside him, her lips pursed in permanent disapproval of a world that had never quite given her what she felt she deserved. Their son, Marcus, was 25 and had never worked a day in his life, living off family money while pursuing what he called artistic endeavors. Then there was Theodore's second wife, Victoria, a woman who had married into the family 20 years ago and had spent every day since trying to prove she belonged. Her daughter from a previous marriage, Sophia, was everything Maya wasn't: blonde, polished, entitled, and absolutely convinced that the world owed her everything. And finally, there was Dr. Harrison Blackwood, Theodore's brother, a retired surgeon who had always resented living in Theodore's shadow. His wife, Eleanor, and their twin daughters, Chloe and Claire, completed the family circle. 12 people, all connected by blood or marriage to Theodore Blackwood, all expecting to become significantly wealthier in the next hour. None of them had ever seen Maya before in their lives. The will reading was to take place in Theodore's private study, a room that perfectly captured the essence of the man who had built an empire from nothing. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes on everything from philosophy to business strategy. A massive oak desk dominated one corner, its surface clear except for a single photograph, a picture of Theodore as a young man, standing beside a beautiful Asian woman and a little girl with pigtails. Maya found herself staring at that photograph, something stirring in the back of her mind. The woman looked familiar, though Maya couldn't place where she might have seen her before. There was something about her smile, the way she held her head. "Please, everyone, take a seat," said James Whitmore, Theodore's longtime attorney. He was a distinguished man in his 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen decades of family drama play out in rooms just like this one. "We have quite a bit to cover today." Maya hesitated at the edge of the room, uncertain where she belonged in this tableau of expectant heirs. Patricia Blackwood noticed her hovering by the door and made a dismissive gesture. "I'm sorry, dear, but I think you're in the wrong place. The staff entrance is around back." Heat flooded Maya's cheeks, but before she could respond, James Whitmore spoke up. "Actually, Miss Chen is exactly where she needs to be. Please, Maya, take a seat. You'll want to hear this." The way he said her name, with familiarity, with kindness, sent a chill down Maya's spine. How did he know her? What was she doing here among these people who clearly saw her as an intruder in their world? As Maya settled into a chair at the back of the room, she caught several family members exchanging glances. Richard whispered something to his wife that made her frown. Marcus actually turned around to stare at Maya, his expression a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "Now then," James Whitmore continued, opening a thick folder. Theodore Blackwood was very specific about how he wanted his final wishes to be handled. "This will was written 6 months ago, and I can assure you that Theodore was of sound mind and body when he made these decisions." Victoria leaned forward in her chair. "James, surely we can skip the formalities. We all know Theodore's wishes. The estate should be divided among the family according to traditional inheritance laws. I'm afraid it's not quite that simple, Victoria. James's smile was gentle but firm. Theodore had very specific ideas about what he wanted to do with his fortune, and I think you'll find his reasoning quite illuminating. James Whitmore adjusted his glasses and began to read from the thick document in his hands. I, Theodore Marcus Blackwood, being of sound mind and body, do hereby make this my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils. The room was so quiet, Maya could hear her own heartbeat. Every eye was fixed on the lawyer, every breath held in anticipation. To my nephew, Richard Blackwood, who has asked me for money more times than I can count, I leave the sum of $50,000, with the hope that he will finally learn to live within his means. Richard's face went white. $50,000? That wouldn't even cover his gambling debts. Patricia grabbed his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve. To my wife, Victoria, I leave the house in the Hamptons and a yearly allowance of $100,000, which should be more than sufficient for her needs. Victoria's gasp was audible. The house in the Hamptons was worth maybe $2 million, and $100,000 a year was comfortable, but it wasn't the fortune she'd been expecting. Her daughter Sophia looked equally stunned. To my brother Harrison, I leave my medical textbook collection in the sum of $200,000. Dr. Harrison Blackwood's face remained impassive, but Maya could see his jaw tighten. $200,000 was a nice sum, but not for a man who had expected to inherit half of a multi-billion-dollar empire. James continued reading through a list of smaller bequests, money to longtime servants, donations to various charities, gifts to distant cousins. With each name that wasn't theirs, the remaining family members grew more agitated. Finally, Marcus couldn't contain himself any longer. What about the rest of us? What about the business, the investment properties, the art collection? James Whitmore looked up from the will, his expression grave. That brings us to the main clause of Theodore's will, the clause that governs the distribution of his primary estate, including Blackwood Industries, all investment properties, the art collection, and the bulk of his liquid assets, estimated at approximately $2.8 billion. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. $2.8 billion. Maya felt dizzy. She had never even imagined such an amount of money. Theodore's instructions regarding this portion of his estate are very clear, James continued. Quote, I have watched my family for decades, waiting to see evidence of the values that built this fortune: hard work, compassion, integrity, and the understanding that true wealth comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. I have been disappointed. Therefore, I am leaving the entirety of my primary estate to someone who has demonstrated these qualities without even knowing she was being watched. Someone who carries not just my blood, but my hopes for what the Blackwood name could represent. The room erupted in chaos. Voices rose in anger and disbelief. Chairs scraped against the floor as people stood up in outrage. Accusations flew through the air like weapons. What the hell does that mean? Who is he talking about? This is insane. James held up a hand for silence. The primary beneficiary of Theodore Blackwood's estate is Maya Lin Chen. Every head in the room turned to stare at Maya. She felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her, as if she were falling through space and time. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of elaborate practical joke. There must be some mistake, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the chaos erupting around her. No mistake, James said firmly. Maya, you are Theodore Blackwood's primary heir. Congratulations. The explosion of outrage that followed was unlike anything Maya had ever witnessed. Richard shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. This is impossible, She's nobody. She's not even family. I'll contest this, Patricia shrieked. This girl is obviously some kind of con artist. Victoria was more controlled but equally furious. James, Theodore clearly wasn't in his right mind. No one leaves a fortune to a complete stranger. But it was Marcus who approached Maya directly, his handsome face twisted with contempt. What did you do? How did you trick him? Did you seduce him? Is that what this is about? Maya flinched as if she'd been slapped. I never even met him, she said, her voice stronger now, anger beginning to replace shock. I have no idea what this is about. Liar, Sophia spat. Gold diggers like you are all the same. You probably targeted him, made him think you cared about him. That's enough, James Whitmore said sharply. I will not allow you to attack Maya's character based on nothing but your own disappointment. Theodore's will is legally binding and thoroughly documented. There are no grounds for contest. Dr. Harrison, who had been silent throughout the outburst, finally spoke. James, surely you can see how this looks. A girl none of us have ever met, inheriting everything. There has to be more to this story. James nodded slowly. You're absolutely right, Harrison. There is much more to this story. Theodore knew you would react this way, and he prepared for it. He left detailed explanations for his decision, including information that I think will surprise all of you. Maya, this will be difficult to hear, but you deserve to know the truth. Everyone in this room deserves to know the truth. James Whitmore reached into his briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. This letter was written by Theodore 23 years ago, but he instructed me to seal it and only open it after his death, in the presence of his entire family. Maya, what I'm about to read will explain not just why you're here, but who you are. Maya's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together in her lap. Around the room, the family members had fallen silent, sensing that they were about to hear something that would change everything. James carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. Theodore's handwriting was strong and decisive, even at 69 years old. My dearest family, James began, if you are hearing this letter, it means I am gone, and you have just learned that I have left my fortune to a young woman named Maya Chen. I imagine you are angry, confused, and perhaps convinced that I had lost my mind in my final years. I assure you, I was never more clear-headed than when I made this decision. 24 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life. My daughter, Li Mei, fell in love with a man I deemed unsuitable, not because of any flaw in his character, but because he was not wealthy, not connected, not the kind of man I had envisioned for my only child. When Li Mei told me she intended to marry him, I forbade it. When she defied me and married him anyway, I cut her off completely. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Li Mei. Her mother's name had been Li Mei. I told myself I was protecting the family name, maintaining our standards. But the truth was simpler and more shameful. I was a proud, stubborn old man who couldn't accept that my daughter's happiness mattered more than my own ego. When Li Mei tried to reconcile with me after her daughter was born, I refused to see her. When she sent me photographs of my granddaughter, I returned them unopened. When she wrote me letters begging for forgiveness for the sin of loving someone I didn't approve of, I burned them without reading them. Maya felt the room spinning around her. This couldn't be real. Her mother had never mentioned Theodore Blackwood, had never spoken of a wealthy family that had rejected her. Li Mei died 7 years ago, James continued reading. And I didn't even know until 2 years later when a private investigator I hired finally tracked down her address. By then, my granddaughter was living alone, working multiple jobs to put herself through school, struggling in ways that no member of my family should ever have to struggle. I realized then that I had not just lost my daughter, I had failed her. and I had failed her child. Maya's eyes filled with tears. Her mother had died when Maya was 17, leaving her completely alone in the world. She had never known her father, had never had any family except her mother. The idea that there had been a grandfather somewhere, a man with the power to help, was almost too painful to process. For the past 2 years, I have been watching Maya from a distance, learning about the woman my granddaughter has become, despite my abandonment. I have seen her work 40-hour weeks while carrying a full course load in college. I have watched her give her last $5 to a homeless man, even when she barely had enough money for groceries. I have seen her tutor other students for free, help elderly customers at the diner where she works, and never once complain about the hardships that my pride inflicted on her. Around the room, the family members were staring at Maya with a mixture of shock, resentment, and something that might have been recognition. She was their blood, their cousin, their niece, their granddaughter. She belonged here in a way none of them had imagined. Maya embodies everything I hoped the Blackwood name would represent, the letter continued. She has integrity, compassion, work ethic, and the kind of genuine goodness that cannot be taught or bought. She has these qualities not because she was raised in wealth, but because she was raised by a woman who never let bitterness poison her heart, despite having every reason to hate me. My dear family, you have been raised in privilege and comfort, but you have not been tested by genuine hardship. You have been given every advantage, but you have not learned the value of earning something through your own efforts. I do not leave my fortune to Maya to punish you, but because I believe she is the only one among my heirs who will use it to build something meaningful, rather than simply to consume it. The silence that followed was deafening. Maya was openly crying now, tears streaming down her face as she tried to process this revelation about her mother's past. Her mother, who had worked as a seamstress and cleaned houses to support them, had been the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the state. Her mother, who had never once spoken bitterly about her circumstances, had been cut off from her family for the crime of choosing love over status. Richard was the first to speak, his voice hoarse with shock. Li Mei. I remember Li Mei. She was maybe 10 years older than me. Beautiful girl, always laughing. She used to sneak me cookies from the kitchen when I visited Uncle Theodore. Patricia stared at Maya with new eyes, trying to see the resemblance to the cousin she had met decades ago. You have her eyes, she whispered. God, you have exactly her eyes. Victoria looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. This girl is Theodore's granddaughter? His actual blood? Dr. Harrison removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I remember when Li Mei left. Theodore was impossible to be around for months afterward. We all thought he was angry, but maybe he was heartbroken. Maya finally found her voice. My mother never told me, she said, her words choked with emotion. She never said anything about this family, about him, about any of you. I thought I was alone in the world. She was protecting you, James said gently. Li Mei knew that Theodore was proud and stubborn, and she probably thought he would never change his mind. She didn't want you to grow up feeling rejected by family you'd never had a chance to know. Marcus, who had been silent throughout this revelation, suddenly stood up and began pacing. Wait. This changes nothing. So she's related to us, so what? She's still some nobody from the wrong side of town. She doesn't know anything about business, about maintaining wealth, about our world. Theodore might as well have left his fortune to a child. His words stung Maya back to awareness. Around the room, she could see the family members processing this new information, and she could almost watch the calculations happening behind their eyes. She was family, yes, but she was still an outsider. She was still someone they could potentially manipulate or control. Sophia was the first to try. She moved to sit beside Maya, her voice suddenly warm and welcoming. Maya, sweetie, this must be so overwhelming for you. You've just learned about this whole family you never knew you had, and now you're supposed to manage billions of dollars? That's terrifying. But you don't have to do this alone. We're family now. We can help you. Maya looked into Sophia's eyes and saw the calculation there, the predatory kindness of someone who smelled weakness. Help me how? Well, you'll need advisors, won't you? People who understand how wealth works, how investments and business decisions are made. People who've lived in this world their whole lives. Sophia's smile was perfectly crafted. I'm sure we could work out some kind of arrangement where you maintain control, of course. But we help guide your decisions, keep you from making any costly mistakes. Richard had caught on to his cousin's strategy and jumped in enthusiastically. Absolutely. Maya, managing this kind of wealth is incredibly complex. Tax implications, investment strategies, legal compliance, it's not something you can learn overnight. But as family, we'd be happy to take that burden off your shoulders. Maya felt a familiar sensation, one she'd experienced many times in her life when people had tried to take advantage of her perceived naivety. Landlords who tried to overcharge her, employers who'd attempted to shortchange her, classmates who'd wanted her to do their homework. They all had that same tone, that same false concern hiding pure self-interest. But this was different. This wasn't about a few $100s or a passing grade. This was about billions of dollars, about her entire future, about the legacy of the grandfather she'd never known, and the mother who'd suffered in silence to protect her. That's very kind of you, Maya said slowly, her voice steadier now. But I have to ask, where was all this family concern for the past 21 years? Where was all this helpful guidance when my mother was working 3 jobs to keep us housed and fed? Where was all this family solidarity when I was eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner because we couldn't afford groceries? The room fell silent again. Maya could feel something changing inside her, a strength she'd inherited from her mother beginning to assert itself. You want to know something about managing wealth? Maya continued, standing up now, her eyes flashing with an emotion that made several family members step back. I've been managing wealth my entire life. I've taken $17 and made it stretch for a week's worth of meals. I've calculated to the penny how much I could spend on textbooks and still make rent. I've made decisions about whether to buy medicine or pay the electric bill. That's wealth management. Patricia tried to interrupt. Maya, dear, that's not really the same thing. Isn't it? Maya's voice was sharp now, carrying an authority that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. You're worried I don't understand the complexity of large-scale financial decisions? I've been making complex financial decisions since I was 12 years old. The difference is, my decisions were about survival, not about which vacation home to buy. She turned to face the entire family, this group of strangers who were somehow her blood relatives. You want to help me? You want to guide me? Then tell me, what charitable causes did any of you support with Theodore's money while he was alive? When was the last time any of you worked for something instead of just expecting it to be handed to you? What value have you created in the world beyond spending money that someone else earned? The silence stretched on uncomfortably. Maya had struck directly at the heart of their insecurity, the knowledge that they had been living off Theodore's achievements without creating any of their own. Victoria finally spoke, her voice cold. You have no idea what it's like to maintain a position in society, to uphold family obligations, to preserve a legacy. There are expectations, responsibilities that come with the Blackwood name. Like cutting off your own daughter for marrying someone you didn't approve of? Maya shot back. Like abandoning your granddaughter to poverty because your pride was more important than family. Those kinds of responsibilities. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Maya had found her footing now, and she wasn't the uncertain, intimidated girl who had walked into this room an hour ago. She was Li Mei's daughter, and she carried her mother's strength as well as Theodore's blood. James Whitmore had been watching this exchange with growing satisfaction. Theodore had been right about his granddaughter. She had spine, intelligence, and moral clarity that couldn't be taught. Now came the next part of Theodore's plan. Actually, James said, there's more to Theodore's will that you need to hear. Maya, your grandfather anticipated exactly this kind of pressure from the family, and he made provisions for it. He opened another document, this one much shorter. Theodore established what he called a character clause in his will. Maya, you have the legal right to refuse this inheritance at any point in the first year after Theodore's death. If you do refuse it, the money doesn't go to the other family members. Instead, it goes entirely to a charitable foundation Theodore established, focused on providing educational opportunities for disadvantaged youth. The reaction was immediate and explosive. What? Richard shouted. If she doesn't want it, it should come to the family. That's not legal, Patricia added. You can't just give away family money to strangers. Actually, it's completely legal, James said calmly. Theodore was very clear about his intentions. He didn't want Maya to feel pressured into accepting the inheritance, but he also didn't want the family to benefit from pressuring her to refuse it. Maya felt a rush of gratitude toward the grandfather she'd never known. Even in death, he was protecting her, making sure she had real choices. But James wasn't finished. There's also a clause about family cooperation. Maya, if you do accept the inheritance, Theodore hoped you would find ways to include family members who demonstrate genuine change and commitment to the values he wanted to preserve. But the decision is entirely yours, and you're under no obligation to share with anyone who hasn't earned it. This revelation created a fascinating shift in the room's dynamics. Suddenly, the family members weren't just angry at Maya, they were terrified of her. She held all the power now, and their financial future depended entirely on her goodwill. Sophia immediately tried to recalibrate her approach. Maya, I think I may have come across wrong earlier. I wasn't trying to manipulate you, I genuinely want to help. This family has been broken for too long. Maybe this is our chance to heal. But Maya was studying her carefully, looking for any sign of genuine remorse or growth. What would healing look like to you, Sophia? Sophia seemed caught off guard by the directness of the question. Well, I suppose we'd need to get to know each other. You'd need to learn about the family history, our traditions. And what would I need to contribute to that healing? Maya pressed. Well, the money would certainly help bring the family together. Maya shook her head sadly. You're still thinking about the money first. You're still calculating how to benefit from this situation rather than asking what you could contribute to it. Maya walked over to Theodore's desk and picked up the photograph she'd noticed earlier. The picture of Theodore as a young man with the beautiful Asian woman and the little girl. This is my mother, isn't it? She said quietly. And this little girl. That's me. James nodded. Theodore kept that picture on his desk for over 20 years, even after he cut Li Mei off. I think part of him always regretted his decision, but he was too proud to admit it. Maya stared at the photograph, seeing her mother as she'd never seen her before. Young, happy, surrounded by love and wealth. The contrast with the woman who had raised Maya, tired, struggling, but never bitter, was heartbreaking. She could have told me, Maya whispered. She could have used this knowledge to guilt him into helping us, but she never did. Your mother was a remarkable woman, Dr. Harrison said quietly. I remember her kindness, her laughter, She could have been angry, vindictive. She chose grace instead. She chose... For the first time since this ordeal began, Maya felt a connection to someone in this room. She looked at Dr. Harrison with new interest. You really remember her? I was Theodore's younger brother, but Li Mei never made me feel like the less successful one. She always asked about my medical studies, encouraged me to pursue surgery even when Theodore thought it was impractical. She believed in people. Maya could hear genuine affection in his voice, a warmth that was completely absent from the calculations and manipulations of the other family members. What happened to change Theodore's mind about her marriage? Maya asked. Dr. Harrison glanced around the room, clearly uncomfortable with sharing family secrets, but recognizing that Maya deserved the truth. Li Mei's husband, your father, was David Chen, a literature professor at the community college. He was brilliant, kind, absolutely devoted to your mother. But he had no money, no family connections, no business sense. Theodore was convinced that Li Mei was throwing away her life, that she'd end up poor and regretful. Maya felt a pang of sadness for the father she'd never known. Her mother had rarely spoken of him, saying only that he'd died when Maya was a baby, and that he'd been a good man who loved them both. Theodore was wrong about David, Dr. Harrison continued. He might not have been wealthy, but he made Li Mei happy in a way I'd never seen before. When Theodore forbade the marriage, Li Mei didn't back down. She told him she'd rather have love and struggle than wealth and misery. And Theodore couldn't forgive her for choosing love over his approval, Maya said, understanding flooding through her. Theodore was a brilliant businessman, but he was terrible at admitting mistakes, Dr. Harrison said sadly. By the time he realized he'd been wrong, too many years had passed. Too much pride was at stake. I think he spent the rest of his life regretting that decision. Maya felt tears coming again, but this time they were for the grandfather she'd never had a chance to know, the man whose pride had cost him decades with his daughter and granddaughter. Maya set the photograph back on the desk and turned to face the room full of her newfound relatives. The anger and desperation in their faces was palpable, but she could see something else now, the same kind of fear she'd lived with her entire life. They were afraid of not having enough, afraid of losing their status, afraid of being judged and found wanting. The difference was, Maya's fear had taught her empathy and resilience. Their fear had taught them entitlement and manipulation. I need some time to think, Maya said finally. This is all overwhelming. Of course, James said kindly. Maya, you don't have to make any decisions today. Theodore's will gives you a full year to decide whether to accept the inheritance. Richard couldn't help himself. A year? We're supposed to wait a year to find out what happens to the family business? The business will continue operating under the management structure Theodore put in place, James replied. Maya won't need to make any operational decisions until she's ready. But what about our positions in the company? Marcus demanded. Our salaries? Our roles? All existing employment contracts remain in effect, James said. Maya will have the authority to make changes, but she's under no obligation to do so immediately. Maya could see the relief in some faces, the continued anxiety in others. They were all trying to figure out how to manage her, how to secure their positions, how to benefit from this new reality. All except Dr. Harrison. Maya, he said quietly. Would you like to see your mother's childhood room? It's still exactly as she left it. The room was like stepping back in time. 24 years had passed, but Theodore had preserved every detail exactly as Li Mei had left it. The walls were painted a soft lavender, with white furniture and shelves lined with books in both English and Mandarin. A desk sat by the window, covered with journals, photograph albums, and mementos from a privileged childhood. Maya moved through the space like a sleepwalker, touching surfaces her mother had touched, seeing evidence of a life she'd never known existed. On the nightstand was a graduation photo from Lee May's high school, showing a beautiful, confident young woman with the world at her feet. She was valedictorian, Dr. Harrison said softly. Theodore was so proud of her academic achievements. She'd been accepted to Harvard, Yale, Princeton. She could have done anything. But she chose love instead, Maya said, picking up another photograph that showed Lee May and a young man with kind eyes and an easy smile. Her father, David Chen. She chose authenticity over expectation, Dr. Harrison corrected. Lee May was never interested in the superficial aspects of wealth, the status, the social climbing, the appearance of success. She wanted to build something real with someone who valued the same things she did. Maya opened one of the journals on the desk and found page after page of her mother's handwriting, detailing her thoughts about life, love, family, and responsibility. One entry, dated just a month before her death, made Maya's breath catch. I often wonder about the choice I made, whether it was fair to Maya to cut her off from the Blackwood family and fortune. But then I watch her work so hard for everything she achieves, see her treat everyone with kindness regardless of their status, observe her making ethical choices even when they cost her personally, and I know I raised her right. She has everything that matters: integrity, compassion, resilience, joy. If Theodore could see the woman she's becoming, I think he'd finally understand that wealth without character is just elaborate poverty. Maya closed the journal, her heart aching with love and loss. Her mother had known. Somehow, Lee May had understood that her father was watching, had hoped that he would see what his granddaughter had become. She never stopped loving him, Maya whispered. And he never stopped loving her, Dr. Harrison replied. Theodore kept newspaper clippings about your academic achievements, photos of you from your high school graduation that someone had sent him anonymously. I think your mother may have been sending them, hoping he'd reach out. Maya sat down on her mother's bed, overwhelmed by the complexity of emotions swirling through her. Grief for the grandfather she'd never known, anger at the pride that had separated their family, gratitude for the mother who had protected her from that rejection, and fear about the enormous responsibility that had just been placed on her shoulders. What would she want me to do? Maya asked, more to herself than to Dr. Harrison. I think she'd want you to do exactly what you think is right, he said gently. Lee May never let other people's expectations define her choices, even when it cost her everything. Downstairs, the remaining family members had regrouped in the main living room. The shock of learning Maya's true identity had worn off, replaced by urgent strategizing about how to salvage their financial futures. We need to be smart about this, Victoria said, taking charge with the authority of someone accustomed to managing social situations. That girl holds all the cards now, but she's also completely out of her element. We can work with that. She's not as naive as she looks, Marcus warned. Did you see the way she shut down our offers to help? She's got some backbone. Backbone can be useful, Richard said, as long as it's pointed in the right direction. We just need to convince her that we're all on the same team. Patricia shook her head. Did you hear her talking about charity and values? She sounds just like Theodore when he was having one of his moral superiority moments. We're not going to win her over with appeals to family loyalty. Sophia had been quiet throughout this discussion, but now she spoke up with calculating intelligence. We're thinking about this all wrong, she said. We can't convince her to share the money with us. She's already seen through that approach. But we can position ourselves as the people she needs to accomplish whatever goals she has. What do you mean? Victoria asked. Think about it. She's one person trying to manage a multi-billion-dollar empire. Even if she's smart, even if she's ethical, she's going to need help. She's going to need people she can trust, people who understand this world. Sophia's smile was sharp with ambition. We just need to prove that we can be those people. And how exactly do we do that? Marcus asked skeptically. By becoming the people she needs us to be, Sophia replied. If she values charity, we become philanthropists. If she values hard work, we find ways to contribute meaningfully to the business. If she values family unity, we become the most supportive, loving relatives she could ask for. Richard looked uncomfortable. You're talking about completely changing who we are. I'm talking about survival, Sophia said bluntly. Look, we can sit here and complain about how unfair this is, or we can adapt to the new reality. Maya controls our financial future now. That means we need to figure out what Maya wants and become the kind of people who can give it to her. Victoria nodded slowly. It's not about deception, it's about growth. Maybe this is an opportunity for all of us to become better versions of ourselves. But Patricia wasn't buying it. This is ridiculous. We're supposed to grovel to some girl who was serving coffee yesterday? We're supposed to pretend to be different people just to access our own family money? It's not our money anymore, Dr. Harrison said quietly from the doorway. He'd been listening to this conversation with growing disgust, and now he stepped into the room with an expression of disappointment that made them all look away. It's Maya's money, and frankly, after listening to all of you plot and scheme, I'm beginning to understand why Theodore made the choice he did. Harrison, don't be ridiculous, Victoria said. We're just trying to figure out how to move forward as a family. No, you're trying to figure out how to manipulate a young woman who's already been through enough pain. Dr. Harrison's voice was stern in a way his family rarely heard. That girl just learned that her grandfather spent 20 years regretting his decision to abandon her family, but not enough to actually do anything about it while her mother was alive. She's processing grief, shock, and enormous responsibility, and all you can think about is how to get your hands on her inheritance. Alone in her mother's childhood room, Maya was having a very different kind of conversation with herself, with her mother's memory, and with the ghost of the grandfather she'd never met. She'd found more journals, more photographs, more evidence of a family that could have been hers if pride and stubbornness hadn't gotten in the way. But she'd also found something else. Evidence of her mother's incredible strength and wisdom. In letter after letter, Li Mei had written about her hopes for Maya's future, her determination to raise a daughter who understood the value of everything she achieved, her belief that struggle could build character in ways that privilege never could. I watch Maya work so hard for everything she has, and I see her genuine joy when she accomplishes something through her own effort. That's a gift I could never have given her if we'd been reconciled with Father. She's learning that her worth isn't determined by external circumstances, that she can create value and meaning regardless of what the world gives her or takes away. Those are lessons that money can't buy. Maya realized that her mother had been preparing her for this moment, even without knowing it would come. Every lesson about integrity, every example of perseverance in the face of hardship, every demonstration of kindness regardless of circumstance, it had all been building toward this test of character. The question wasn't whether she was qualified to inherit Theodore's fortune. The question was what she would do with it that would honor both her mother's sacrifices and her grandfather's hopes. Maya opened another journal, this one from Li Mei's final year, and found an entry that made her gasp. I received another letter today from the private investigator. He's still trying to locate Maya and me on behalf of someone he won't name, but I suspect it's Father. Part of me wants to respond, to let him know that we're here, that Maya is everything he could have hoped for in a granddaughter. But another part of me fears that reconnecting with that world would change her, would make her question the values I've tried to instill. I've decided to wait. If Father truly wants to find us, he will. And if he does, I hope he'll see that the path I chose led somewhere beautiful, even if it wasn't the destination he would have picked for me. Maya felt tears streaming down her face. Her mother had known that Theodore was looking for them, had chosen not to respond because she was protecting Maya from potential disappointment and corruption. Even facing her own mortality, Li Mei had put Maya's character development above financial security. Now Maya understood the true weight of her inheritance. It wasn't just money, it was the responsibility to prove that her mother's choices had been right, that integrity and compassion were more valuable than status and wealth, that Theodore's faith in her character was justified. Maya made her decision and returned to the main living room, where the family was still gathered. The atmosphere was thick with tension and barely concealed desperation. "I've been thinking about everything I've learned today," Maya said, her voice calm and steady. "About my mother, about Theodore, about all of you, and about what this inheritance really means." Every person in the room leaned forward, hanging on her words. "I've decided to accept the inheritance," Maya continued, "but I'm going to make some changes in how it's managed." The relief in the room was palpable, but Maya held up a hand to indicate she wasn't finished. Theodore was wrong about a lot of things, but he was right about one thing: wealth without purpose is meaningless. So I'm going to give you all an opportunity to prove that you can be part of something meaningful. She looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes individually. "I'm establishing a family foundation focused on educational opportunities for disadvantaged youth. Everyone in this room is welcome to participate, but participation means real work, not just board positions and fancy titles. It means spending time with the kids we're helping, understanding their challenges, contributing your skills and knowledge to their success." Marcus looked skeptical. "What kind of work are we talking about?" "The kind of work I've been doing my whole life," Maya said simply. "Tutoring students who can't afford private help, mentoring kids who don't have family support, helping people navigate systems they don't understand, making sure that other young people don't have to choose between education and survival the way I did." Patricia made a face. "That sounds very noble, dear, but what does that have to do with maintaining the family business and investments?" "Everything," Maya said firmly. "The business will continue to operate, but its mission is going to expand. We're going to create scholarship programs, internship opportunities, job training initiatives. We're going to use Theodore's wealth to build ladders for other people the way I wish someone had built them for my mother and me." She could see the family members exchanging glances, trying to figure out how this would affect their own financial situations. "Now, here's where it gets interesting for all of you," Maya continued. "Everyone who participates meaningfully in the Foundation's work, and I mean really participates, not just shows up for photo opportunities, will receive a share of the estate's annual income. The more you contribute, the more you benefit." Richard perked up immediately. "How much are we talking about?" "That depends entirely on you," Maya said. "The Foundation will have performance metrics, impact measurements, accountability standards. If you help us change 1,000 lives, you'll be compensated accordingly. If you show up once a month for board meetings and contribute nothing else, you'll receive nothing else." Victoria looked intrigued despite herself. "And what about the people who choose not to participate?" "Then you choose not to benefit from Theodore's wealth," Maya said simply. "Which is fine. You're all adults with your own resources and abilities. But Theodore's money will go toward causes that align with Theodore's values, as I understand them." The room fell silent as everyone processed Maya's proposal. She was offering them a path back to financial security, but it required them to actually earn it through service to others. Dr. Harrison was the first to speak. "I think it's brilliant," he said quietly. "I've spent my career helping people, and I'd be honored to help establish medical and health programs for underserved communities." Maya smiled at him gratefully. "I was hoping you'd say that. Your experience would be invaluable." Sophia looked thoughtful. "I studied marketing and public relations. I could help with outreach, fundraising, building awareness for the foundation's work." "If you're genuinely committed to it, yes," Maya said. "But I want to be clear. This isn't about using your skills to manipulate people or create false impressions. It's about authentic communication that helps people understand how they can help and be helped." Marcus was still skeptical. "What if we don't want to spend our lives doing charity work? What if we have other interests, other career goals?" "Then pursue them," Maya said. "Nobody's forcing you to participate, but Theodore's money stays with Theodore's mission." Patricia looked genuinely distressed. "Maya, you have to understand. We've built our lives around certain expectations, our social obligations, our lifestyle, our children's educational plans." "Then maybe it's time to build your lives around different expectations," Maya said, not unkindly but without sympathy. "My mother built her life around love, hard work, and service to others. And she raised a daughter who's now in a position to honor those values. Your expectations were built around someone else's work and someone else's money. Maybe it's time to build them around your own contributions." Richard was getting agitated again. "This is easy for you to say. You've lived poor your whole life. You don't understand what it's like to have responsibilities, obligations." "I understand perfectly," Maya interrupted, her voice sharp with controlled anger. "I understand what it's like to lie awake at night wondering if you'll be able to make rent. I understand what it's like to wear the same clothes to school every day, because they're the only ones you have. I understand what it's like to skip meals so you can afford textbooks. I understand what it's like to work 40 hours a week while carrying a full course load because there's no safety net, no family money to fall back on." She stood up, her emotions finally getting the better of her composure. "What you call obligations, I call privileges. What you call responsibilities, I call luxuries. You're worried about maintaining your lifestyle. I've been worried about maintaining my life." The raw pain in her voice silenced the room completely. For the first time, they were seeing past Maya's composed exterior to the years of struggle, fear, and loneliness that had shaped her. "But here's the difference between us," Maya continued, her voice steadier now. "My struggles taught me empathy. They taught me that everyone deserves a chance to succeed, that circumstances don't determine worth, that the most important thing you can do with any advantage you're given is to use it to lift other people up." She looked around the room at these people who shared her blood, but had never shared her experiences. "Your advantages taught you entitlement. They taught you that you deserved wealth without work, respect without earning it, security without sacrifice. And that's exactly why Theodore left his money to me instead of to you." Maya's words hit the family like a physical blow, but they also created something unexpected, a moment of genuine self-reflection. For the first time in years, maybe decades, each person in that room was forced to confront the truth about their own character and choices. Victoria was the first to crack. "You're right," she said quietly, her perfectly composed facade crumbling. "God help me. You're absolutely right. I married Theodore not because I loved him, but because I loved what he could give me. And I've spent 20 years justifying that choice by telling myself I was preserving family traditions and maintaining important social connections." Her daughter Sophia looked shocked to hear her mother's admission, but Victoria continued, tears beginning to flow. "I watched Theodore struggle with his decision about Lee May for years. I saw how much he regretted cutting her off, how much he missed her, how much he wondered about his granddaughter. And instead of encouraging him to reach out, to heal that wound, I was grateful that there was one less person to share the inheritance with. Maya felt her anger beginning to soften, replaced by something that might have been compassion. Patricia was crying now too. "I spent Richard's gambling money before he even lost it," she whispered. "I knew he had a problem, but I didn't want him to get help because then people would know, and it would affect our social standing. I enabled his addiction because I was more worried about appearances than about my husband's well-being." Richard looked at his wife with a mixture of shame and gratitude. "I've been telling myself that my gambling was just entertainment, that I had it under control. But the truth is, I was chasing the high of risk because earning money through work felt beneath me. I wanted the thrill of potentially winning big without the effort of actually earning anything." Dr. Harrison had tears in his eyes as he watched his family finally being honest with themselves and each other. Marcus was struggling with his own revelations. "I've never worked for anything in my life," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I called it artistic pursuit, but really I was just afraid to try and potentially fail. It was easier to live off family money and pretend I was too good for regular work than to risk discovering I wasn't as special as I thought I was." The confessions continued around the room, each person acknowledging years of selfishness, entitlement, and moral compromise. It was painful to watch, but Maya could see something else happening, the first stirrings of genuine remorse and the possibility of real change. As the emotional catharsis in the room began to wind down, James Whitmore quietly approached Maya with yet another envelope. "There's one more thing Theodore wanted you to have," he said gently. "A letter written specifically for you, to be given only after you'd had time to meet the family and understand the situation fully." Maya took the envelope with trembling hands, recognizing Theodore's handwriting on the front. "For my granddaughter, Maya Lin Chen, the daughter I never knew I was waiting for." She opened it carefully, aware that everyone in the room was watching her, and began to read aloud. "My dearest Maya, if you are reading this letter, it means you have met your family and learned the truth about your mother's past. I can only imagine how overwhelming and confusing this must be for you. I want you to know that watching you from afar these past 2 years has been both the greatest joy and the deepest sorrow of my life. Joy, because I could see that despite my abandonment, despite the hardships my pride inflicted on you and your mother, you have become everything I could have hoped for in a granddaughter. Sorrow, because I realized too late that I had wasted decades that could have been filled with love, guidance, and family connection. Your mother was right to choose love over status, authenticity over appearance, struggle with meaning over comfort without purpose. It took me far too long to understand that, and by the time I did, I had missed her entire adult life and most of yours. I am leaving you my fortune not as compensation for the years I stole from our family, but because I believe you will use it in ways that honor both your mother's values and the potential I always saw in our family name. You have already proven that you can create value from nothing, find joy in simple things, and maintain integrity under pressure. Now I am asking you to prove that wealth can be a tool for justice rather than an excuse for selfishness. As for the rest of the family, I hope you will give them the chance I never gave your mother, the opportunity to grow beyond their mistakes, to prove that people can change, and to find redemption through service to others. But remember that forgiveness must be earned, not simply granted, and that your first responsibility is to the values that made you who you are, not to the expectations of people who have not yet proven they share those values. I love you, Maya, in a way I was never brave enough to express while I was alive. I am proud of you in a way that has nothing to do with achievements or accomplishments, and everything to do with the goodness of your heart and the strength of your character. Use this inheritance to build the kind of family legacy I always dreamed of, but never had the wisdom to create. Your grandfather, who loved you before he knew you, and wishes he could have known you better." Maya finished reading with tears streaming down her face, and she looked around the room to see that she wasn't alone in her emotion. Even the family members who had been scheming against her an hour earlier were visibly moved by Theodore's words. Maya folded the letter carefully and looked around the room at this group of flawed, complicated, but potentially redeemable people who were her family. "Theodore asked me to give you a chance," she said finally. "And despite everything that's happened today, despite all the manipulation and calculation and selfishness I've seen, I'm going to honor that request. But I'm going to do it on my terms." She walked back to Theodore's desk and picked up a pen, then turned to face them with the authority of someone who had finally accepted the full weight of her inheritance. "Here's what's going to happen. The family foundation I described isn't optional for anyone who wants to benefit from Theodore's wealth. It's mandatory. For the next year, everyone who wants to be considered a beneficiary will work at least 20 hours a week on foundation projects. Not board meetings, not administrative work, not supervision. Actual hands-on service." Richard started to object, but Maya held up a hand. "I'm not finished. During that year, I'll be working alongside you, evaluating not just your contributions, but your growth as people. I'll be watching to see if you can put other people's needs ahead of your own comfort, if you can find joy in helping others rather than just in helping yourselves, and if you can build relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency." Maya's voice grew stronger with each word, the authority she'd inherited from both her mother and grandfather becoming more evident. "At the end of that year, I'll make permanent decisions about how Theodore's wealth will be distributed. People who demonstrate genuine change, who contribute meaningfully to our mission, and who embrace the values Theodore wanted to preserve, will become partners in building something bigger than any of us individually." She looked specifically at Dr. Harrison, whose tear-stained face showed nothing but pride and support. "People who go through the motions without changing, who manipulate situations for their own benefit, or who treat this as an obligation to endure rather than an opportunity to grow, will be thanked for their time and released from any further expectations or benefits." Maya set the pen down and faced the room with complete calm. "And people who choose not to participate at all are free to make that choice. Theodore's money will support our mission with or without your involvement. But this is your one chance to be part of something meaningful. Something that could heal this family and honor the memory of the mother I loved and the grandfather I never got to know." The silence that followed Maya's ultimatum was profound. For the first time in their lives, the Blackwood family members were being asked to prove their worth through service, rather than simply claiming it through birth. Dr. Harrison was the first to respond, standing up and walking over to Maya with quiet dignity. "I don't need a year to decide," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've spent my career in service to others, but I've never connected that service to family legacy the way you're describing. I would be honored to work with you to build something that would make both Li Mei and Theodore proud." Maya smiled at him, the first genuine smile she'd managed since entering this house hours earlier. "Thank you, Uncle Harrison. I was hoping you'd say that." Sophia was the next to stand, her usually perfect composure replaced by something that looked like genuine humility. "I need to be honest with you, Maya. My first instinct is still to calculate how I can benefit from this situation. But listening to you, watching you handle everything that's been thrown at you today, I realize I want to become the kind of person who doesn't think that way first." She took a shaky breath. "I don't know if I can change, but I want to try. I want to be part of something that matters." Maya nodded slowly. "Wanting to change is the first step. But you're right to acknowledge that it won't be easy. The work we're going to do will challenge every assumption you've made about what's important and what isn't. Marcus looked torn between resentment and genuine curiosity. What if we fail? What if we try and can't live up to your standards? Then you'll have learned something about yourselves and contributed something to people who need help, Maya said simply. That's not failure, that's growth. The only failure would be not trying at all. Victoria had been quiet throughout these exchanges, but now she spoke up with uncharacteristic vulnerability. Maya, I need you to know that I spent 20 years married to your grandfather, and I never once heard him talk about anything with the passion and clarity you've shown today. He would have been so proud of you, and so grateful that you're willing to give us this chance. Richard and Patricia were still processing, still calculating, still struggling with the reality that their financial future now depended on their willingness to serve others. But even they seemed to understand that Maya wasn't bluffing, wasn't negotiating, and wasn't going to be manipulated. 1 year later, Maya stood in the same study where she'd first learned about her inheritance, but everything had changed. The walls now displayed photographs from the Foundation's work, images of scholarship recipients, successful job training graduates, and mentorship program participants. Theodore's formal portraits had been joined by pictures of Li Mei and David Chen, finally taking their rightful place in the family history. The family members had responded to Maya's challenge in ways both predictable and surprising. Dr. Harrison had thrown himself into developing medical outreach programs with the enthusiasm of a man who had finally found a way to honor his skills and his values simultaneously. Working alongside Maya in community clinics and health fairs, he had become the uncle she'd never known she needed. Sophia had surprised everyone, including herself, by discovering a genuine talent for connecting with young people who reminded her of who she might have been if she'd had to work for everything she achieved. Her marketing skills had proven invaluable, but more importantly, she had developed real relationships with scholarship recipients who challenged her assumptions about success and worth. Marcus had struggled more than the others, his artistic pretensions and fear of genuine effort making it difficult for him to connect with the Foundation's mission. But slowly, working with teenagers in job training programs, he had begun to find purpose in teaching practical skills rather than pursuing abstract creative goals. His progress was uneven, but it was real. Victoria had channeled her social connections into fundraising efforts that brought new resources to the Foundation, while also educating wealthy donors about the realities of poverty and educational inequality. Her transformation was perhaps the most dramatic, from a woman focused on maintaining appearances to someone genuinely committed to changing lives. Richard and Patricia had had the hardest time adapting. Richard's gambling addiction required professional treatment, and Patricia's social insecurities made it difficult for her to connect authentically with people from different economic backgrounds. But they were trying, attending counseling sessions, and slowly learning to find worth in contribution rather than consumption. As Maya reviewed reports on the Foundation's first-year impact, hundreds of scholarships awarded, dozens of job training programs established, thousands of lives touched, she realized that Theodore had given her something far more valuable than money. He had given her the opportunity to transform not just her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. The girl who had walked into this room 1 year ago had been struggling to survive. The woman standing here now was building systems to help others thrive. The money had made the work possible, but the values her mother had instilled and the character she had developed through hardship had made the work meaningful. Maya opened the bottom drawer of Theodore's desk, where she now kept her mother's journals alongside letters from scholarship recipients, photos from family foundation events, and her own notes about plans for expanding their impact. At the very back, she found the letter she'd written to her mother shortly after accepting the inheritance, a letter she would never send but needed to write. "Dear Mom, I finally understand why you never told me about Theodore and the Blackwood family. You knew that wealth without wisdom is dangerous, that privilege without purpose is meaningless, and that the most important inheritance any parent can give their child is the strength to do what's right regardless of what's easy. I miss you every day, but I'm not angry anymore about the choices you made. You gave me everything I needed to handle this responsibility, and you protected me from entitlement and corruption until I was strong enough to resist them. Theodore's money will help thousands of young people, but your values will guide how we help them. I wish you could see what we're building together. Me and this complicated family that's slowly learning to be worthy of the name they carry. I think you'd be proud of Uncle Harrison, who reminds me so much of you in his quiet compassion. I think you'd be amazed by Sophia's transformation from manipulator to mentor. I think you'd even find hope in Richard and Patricia's slow progress toward authenticity. But mostly, I hope you'd be proud of me for choosing love over anger, forgiveness over revenge, and purpose over profit. I'm using Theodore's fortune to build the kind of world you always believed was possible. One where everyone gets a real chance to succeed, where family means support instead of exploitation, and where wealth serves justice instead of selfishness. Thank you for every sacrifice you made, every lesson you taught, and every example you set. I am who I am because of your love, and I'm using that love to change the world. Your daughter, who finally found her way home. 1 year after the will reading, Maya convened a final family meeting in the same study where everything had begun. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of tension and calculation, there was nervous anticipation and genuine care. I asked you all here because it's time for me to fulfill my promise, Maya began, looking around at faces that had changed as much as her own over the past 12 months. I said I would evaluate your participation in the Foundation's work and make decisions about long-term involvement in Theodore's legacy. Dr. Harrison sat quietly, confident in the work he had done, but not presumptuous about the outcome. Sophia fidgeted nervously, knowing she had changed but uncertain whether she had changed enough. Marcus looked hopeful for the first time in years, having discovered that meaningful work was more satisfying than aimless privilege. Victoria maintained her composure, but her eyes showed genuine emotion as she waited to learn whether she would be part of the family's future. Richard and Patricia held hands, both knowing that their progress had been slower and more difficult than the others, but hoping that effort would count as much as achievement. Over the past year, I've watched each of you struggle with concepts that were foreign to your experience: delayed gratification, service without recognition, success measured by impact rather than income. Some of you adapted quickly, others needed more time, but everyone in this room has changed. Maya opened a folder containing legal documents that would determine everyone's future relationship with the Blackwood fortune. Theodore's will gave me complete authority over his estate, but I've decided that kind of concentrated power goes against everything we've learned about shared responsibility and mutual accountability. So I've restructured everything. She handed each person a packet of papers. The Foundation is now governed by a board that includes all of you, plus external members who represent the communities we serve. Every person in this room has earned the right to be part of that governance, because every person in this room has proven they can put service ahead of self-interest. The relief and joy in the room was palpable, but Maya held up a hand. But this isn't a return to the old system of inheritance without responsibility. Your ongoing involvement and ongoing financial benefit depends on your continuing contribution to our mission. This is a partnership, not a payout. Dr. Harrison smiled through tears. Maya, what you've done, what you've built, it's everything Li Mei hoped for, and everything Theodore dreamed of. You've given us all the chance to become better people. Maya looked around at these people who had started as strangers, united only by blood, and were now family, united by purpose. Theodore was wrong about a lot of things, but he was right about one thing. Money is only valuable if it serves something greater than itself. We've spent this year discovering what that something greater looks like. Now we get to spend the rest of our lives building it. As the family filed out of the study, chattering excitedly about plans and projects and possibilities, Maya remained behind for a moment. She walked over to the photograph of Theodore, Li Mei, and baby Maya, the picture that had started her journey toward understanding. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure if she was speaking to her grandfather, her mother, or the universe that had brought them all together despite decades of separation. "Thank you for the second chance, for the family I never knew I needed, and for the opportunity to prove that love is always stronger than pride." Outside the study windows, Maya could see Dr. Harrison explaining something to Marcus while Sophia listened intently. Victoria took notes, and Richard and Patricia asked thoughtful questions. A year ago, these people had been strangers brought together by greed and expectation. Now they were partners united by purpose and possibility. Maya picked up her mother's journal from the desk drawer and found the entry she'd been looking for. "The best inheritance any parent can give their child isn't money or status or connections. It's the wisdom to recognize what matters and the strength to choose it over what's easy." Li Mei had been right, as always. And now, finally, her daughter was in a position to pass that inheritance on to others. Not just through money, but through example, through opportunity, and through the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. The heir no one expected had become the family they all needed. If Maya's journey from struggling student to transformative leader moved you, please hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs a reminder that the most valuable inheritance isn't money. It's the values that guide how we use it. Drop a comment below telling us, have you ever had to prove your worth to people who judged you by your circumstances? Or have you witnessed someone choose compassion over comfort, service over selfishness? Share your story. We want to hear it. And if you want more incredible feel-good stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, the transformative power of integrity, and moments that restore your faith in humanity, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. See you in the next story.